How do I get so much input? I am Joseph. This is Input English. Today's topic is a useful one. How do I get so much input in comprehensible input? How can it be done? Let me begin by saying I'm not special. I have no special talent for languages. Over the decades, I have failed to learn languages. I have quit learning languages out of boredom. Failure has become the foundation of my modern day success. You could say that it took me years to discover what didn't work. Knowing what to avoid, I was able to build some success learning languages. The problem for most of us is simple. We're busy. There are not enough hours in the day. That's a common expression in English. There are not enough hours in the day. So how could I put together a program using comprehensible input to successfully acquire language? That's what we're going to talk about today. Before we get started, let me ask you, if you have not already, please subscribe to this channel. Hit the free subscribe button. It really helps. For those of us who have tried to learn language by other methods in the past, we may have some baggage. If one has baggage, that's a casual expression for prejudices or prior experiences that interfere. My experience with traditional learning methods told me that language learning was boring and not very productive. I learned over the years that language learning was hard, and I have to classify all of that as baggage. Those are beliefs that are not helpful, and those are beliefs that do not apply to comprehensible input. Also, in the 21st century, most of us are leery of questionable methods. There are a lot of false claims made on the internet, for instance. If you go onto YouTube, you will see titles and descriptions that suggest that you might learn a language in 30 days with no effort, fluent in 3 months. There are a lot of false claims, and we have enough common sense to filter out a lot of that. The trouble is, content creators are clever trying to hook us, trying to capture our attention with sensational claims. And these can be a problem because we can get deceived as we watch these descriptions of novel methods for language learning. In general, I don't find this very helpful. I find it confusing and time-consuming. The big difference for me in language learning has been comprehensible input. Why? Because it was cleverly described in a YouTube video? No. There are two reasons I was interested in comprehensible input. One is it had a scientific underpinning. Stephen Krashen, who described comprehensible input, was a college professor. He was doing research. It appeared that comprehensible input gained a lot of credibility because it came out of research and it was supported by evidence. The other reason I was interested in comprehensible input was that it matched my experience. When I was living in Austria and listening to people talk to me in German, I was learning faster than I had ever learned language before. I was astonished how quickly I acquired German language skills while living in Austria for only 3 months. So comprehensible input matched my experience. That, for me, gave it credibility. But we are still left with the question, how do I get so much input? How can one approach the problem of needing to get a lot of input. In addition to the two reasons I was interested in comprehensible input, I did a little experiment. I was familiar with how difficult language learning had been for me. So when I started getting comprehensible input in Spanish, I did it as an experiment. I wanted to see how quickly I could build the language in my mind. Now, there is a risk with experiments because one might not give an adequate trial, might not put enough time to get a true measure of the efficacy of the method. For instance, one could test comprehensible input by watching a single video or by watching a single hour of input. With that sort of experiment, no benefit would be noted. My experiment with comprehensible input in Spanish was 300 hours. I told myself at the beginning I was going to watch 300 hours of videos and decide whether there was any benefit. Needless to say, there was. Why did I choose Spanish? First of all, because I loved the sound of Spanish that I heard when I was in Spain. I had a trip to Spain many years ago. I traveled to 3 different cities. I met a lot of people. I was lecturing on a scientific topic, and there were many gatherings of people, so I had a lot of interaction with people. I loved the sound of Spanish as it was spoken in Spain. That is, it was an emotional response, not a logical response. My logical reason for learning Spanish is obvious. I live in California. Spanish is a major language in California, and one can easily see the benefits of being bilingual, Spanish and English, in California. I also chose Spanish because I would be starting at 0. I was very aware that I was trying this comprehensible input as a game to see if it would work. I suppose it was the scientist within me saying, okay, let's test this method. Let's see if comprehensible input is any good. So I started in Spanish knowing that my starting point was 0. So with that background, how do I get all this input? How did I pull it off? How did it come to pass? First of all, I needed a goal. I needed to figure out what I wanted, because if you have no goal, then how can you attain your goal? You have to have an objective so that your efforts will have a direction. My goal was not to become fluent in Spanish. I had read enough about comprehensible input to know that a goal that I might set, that I wanted to be fluent in Spanish, would be too vague. I needed a more concrete, specific goal. So I trusted the method, and I set the goal of getting 2,000 hours of comprehensible input, and I wanted to do that in 2 years. That made the mathematical analysis very simple. It was 1,000 hours per year, which is a little over 80 hours per month, which is about 3 hours per day. One of the things I learned is that things happen, and some days I didn't get to my goal of 3 hours. Other days I went beyond it, but I set a goal of 3 hours knowing that the final result would likely be less. I attained my goal of 3 hours per day on average for 2 years. How did I do it? Once one has a goal, The next step is to form habits. I knew that if I forced myself to get 3 hours of input per day, and if that process was unpleasant or boring, I would fail and I would quit. So I formed the habit of getting 1 hour first thing in the morning over coffee. Sometimes that would turn into 2 hours. Once my level was high enough, I was able to listen to input while driving my car. That gave me access to more time, which otherwise might be lost listening to the radio, listening to music, or just daydreaming. I formed the habit of getting 1 to 2 hours of additional input in the evenings. So what did I give up in order to get this much time for input? TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, television. I gave up activities that a lot of people spend a lot of time doing, and these activities are not very important. I was talking to a friend of mine about the progress I had made in Spanish. I was sharing my experience, and he told me that he would love to be able to do that. He asked about the mechanics of how I had done it, and I told him that we didn't have a television, so I saved a lot of time each day by not watching television. His response was immediate. He said, "Oh, I couldn't do that." No, because there are a lot of shows in the evening that my wife and I love to watch together. I couldn't give that up. Now, I mention this not to ridicule my friend. I have great respect for him. I just use this story to illustrate that people set their own priorities, and it's our own choice to do so. I am not here dictating that everyone watching this channel needs to get rid of their television, delete their Twitter account, get rid of Instagram. No, I'm just saying this is what I did to free up the time so that I could get multiple hours per day as a habit in service of my long-term goal of getting 2,000 hours of input in 2 years. As you may know, it worked. It worked very well. It did provide an interesting challenge. If you have a goal and you attain that goal, you have to answer the personal question to yourself, what's next? The trouble with attaining a big goal like 2,000 hours is the vagueness of simply incrementing the goal a little bit longer. What I did was set a goal of getting 2,500 hours in 2.5 years. Guess what? I did that. Now, at 2,500 hours, I find myself with no specific goal. So now I'm in a holding pattern. I'm just keeping time. I'm just treading water. Treading water is an interesting expression. It refers to swimming. And if you are swimming, usually you are moving in the water from one position to another. Swimming includes traveling, usually. But if one is in the water and not moving, but endeavoring to keep one's head above water so as to breathe, that's called treading water. You're just staying in one place, moving your limbs adequately to keep your mouth and airway above the water level so that you can breathe. Treading water is an important skill for people who swim. But we use the term treading water for someone who is doing something with no intention of movement. So with respect to my Spanish acquisition, you could say that right now I am treading water. It's not exactly true because I'm getting 2 hours of input per day, but I haven't figured out what my next goal is. We'll talk about that in another video. Today's topic is, how did I get so much input time? In addition to getting comprehensible input, I read a lot. And recently I read a book entitled Flow. The author was Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. The author's name is a Hungarian name because Csikszentmihalyi was born in Hungary around the time of World War II. After the war, he spent some time in Europe and then emigrated to the United States. Professor Csikszentmihalyi became professor and chairman of the department at the University of Chicago in the Department of Psychology. He wrote many scientific papers. He was an experimental psychologist, and he developed an interesting method for sampling populations and discovering psychological principles. He equipped his experimental subjects, his volunteers, with beepers, that is, little radio receivers, and then each day they would send a signal to the beeper, and when the beeper went off, the volunteer, the experimental subject, would respond to questions. What are they doing? How do they feel? And they would enter it in a logbook. This allowed Professor Csikszentmihalyi to make a lot of observations and get a lot of information about how people think and feel. His experiments were usually based in the real world. That is, these people were not locked up in a laboratory. They were doing their usual activities in the day-to-day. They were just carrying a beeper, and they were willing to share information about what they were doing and how they felt when the beeper went off. Each beeper went off about 8 times per day. He used that method to do a lot of psychology experiments. He was also interested that the information that he had gained through his research be transmitted to real people, not just sequestered in scientific papers that eventually would never be read. He saw the wisdom of writing books and giving lectures for the regular people, not just for academicians. This was the basis of his book, Flow. If you've not read that book, I encourage you to think about it. It's a good book, and it's available in about 20 different languages. So don't let the language be a barrier to you accessing the extraordinary thoughts of Professor Csikszentmihalyi. The reason I brought up this academic experimental psychologist is because his work and the work of Stephen Krashen have a nexus. Flow is a state that humans can attain if they are challenged intellectually. The challenge should be slightly above their capability, so they have to strive to accomplish this goal. Flow requires concentration, and when we humans get into a flow state, our sensation of time passage is de-emphasized. We don't notice the passage of time, and we tend to forget about ourself. That is, when we're in flow, we are not self-conscious. In flow, we may not even be self-aware. We are completely focused on the task. If you refer to the work of Stephen Krashen, he suggested that we strive for input which is comprehensible, that is, input that we can easily understand. It should be interesting to us, and it should be compelling. Now, for most of us, comprehensible or understandable, we understand that. That concept is easy for us to understand. Interesting, that's easy to understand too. But what is this compelling business? What does Stephen Krashen mean by compelling? I have to admit, it bothered me. It wasn't entirely clear to me what he meant. As I read more of Stephen Krashen's work, he did explain that the input should capture our imagination, capture our concentration. Now perhaps you can see the nexus between the work of Stephen Krashen and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Compelling, for me, means inducing a flow state. People who get into flow in their activities report that flow is very pleasant, very productive. They report that they are less aware of the passage of time and they are less aware of self. This is how I get so much time for comprehensible input. I've created habits so that each day I get input. I choose input that I can easily understand, input that is interesting, and input that induces a flow state, or input that I can use to get myself into a flow state. There is a huge difference between forcing oneself to do something boring for 3 hours a day or spending 3 hours a day in flow, enjoying every second of the experience and forgetting about the passage of time. Several days ago, I had an appointment with a friend to have coffee in town here. We each set the time on the calendar and we knew that we were going to meet for coffee. That morning, I was getting input in German and Spanish. I got lost in the input. I got into flow. I was enjoying myself greatly. And at the end of a video, I checked the time. It was 25 minutes after 8. I was going to be late. I panicked. I sent a quick text message and apologized. I said I was on my way. I was 10 minutes late. I was embarrassed. I begged his forgiveness. We drank coffee and talked for more than an hour. It was a great time with a good friend to catch up and enjoy time together. The reason I was late to that appointment is I got into flow and I lost track of time. That is how I get so much input every day using comprehensible input. If you have not yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. Please hit the free subscribe button. It makes a big difference. If you have subscribed to the channel, I say thank you. I invite comments below, and if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.